righty, it's March 12th. This is the PFF Forecast. We've got two guests today, and we're starting with the prettiest one.
Oh, I assume that's me.
So apparently last time when we had you on before the Combine, people in the comments were just like, stop hitting on Mike.
Oh,
so I'm
I get that
do my best to keep it going.
I think the one specifically said that George is thirsting for Mike.
Yes.
Which is a phrase that I haven't, being old, I didn't know.
Mike is the foremost aficionado on what it means to be thirsting.
Yeah, I mean, if you follow me on Instagram, you know it's the real deal.
All righty.
Practice.
Everyone here is thankfully pretty healthy. We Lysoled all of the mics. No one's touching. Yeah.
Just Lysol right there.
Yeah, got Randy Moss and disinfecting wipes. So I want to start off by talking about a couple of things that we caught a lot of flack for in the analytics mock that we did. Get your take on some of the kind of bigger picture things that surrounded those decisions. And that has to start, I think, at number 4 with the Giants. So take Henry Ruggs completely out of it for now.
Yes.
Just, assume you've got your best wide receiver, whoever that is. We'll talk about those in a second. What's your feeling on going wide receiver versus top defender there? I
mean, I've mocked wide receivers to them in the past when we do like the what we would do mock, because I think it would help Daniel Jones out a lot. They don't have a guy, and it's one of those things where chips are down. You have someone that you need to beat man coverage. Do you have a guy that has it? Like a third down, 3rd and 4. You need a guy to win a slant. I don't think they have that on the roster right now. And that is really helpful for a quarterback to know, when you see that, hey, this is the guy I'm probably going to go to. This is a matchup that I have that I know is going to win. That helps a lot. That the sort of value of that to a quarterback, you can't really put a value on, or you can't necessarily replace or I'm trying to think of the word.
A replacement level receiver isn't going to get that done for you.
And that's a huge deal.
Whereas I think where we're coming from is look at some of the top defenses. Look at the Patriots.
Yeah.
They clearly have some players that people deemed replaceable that were able to rush the passer for them.
Yeah.
Well, and at the top of the draft, you're drafting stars, and we've shown that stars aren't necessarily as important as depth. And on the offensive side of the ball, that's not necessarily true, right? You have the one quarterback, and all that surrounding him with poor talent does is give him excuses. And we're in the time of year where, like last season, the Cardinals are trying to decide, do we move on from Josh Rosen? Have we seen enough, right? And now, Washington's saying, have we seen enough of Dwayne Haskins? Do we move on? And the best thing that you can do now is find out as quickly as possible whether or not your quarterback is good, so that you can make contingency plans. And without giving Daniel Jones, as many weapons on the outside as possible, you don't do that, and you give him plausible deniability.
I think that's a very good point, because, as we can sit here from the outside and be objective and say they're not going to be good next year. Like, they're not going to win a Super Bowl. Whatever you do in terms of moves this year isn't going to make you a Super Bowl contender. So find out what you have, as quickly as possible with your quarterback, so that, maybe if he does hit, if he turns into, Russell Wilson next year, if he turns into a top 5 quarterback, Daniel Jones, then you should go out and sign free agents next year on the defensive side of the ball. There will always be free agents on pass rushers. There will always be someone there that can help you out defensively. There will not be talents like Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs every single draft.
Right. That's the worst part. So we look at the 2015 draft, and it's not that these teams didn't put players around them, but I think the worst thing that happened to the Titans and the Bucks is that Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota made it through their entire basically rookie contract, and because they wasted sort of those 4 years of sort of what ifs and making excuses and all that kind of stuff, and now they're in a stuck spot. And if you're the Giants or you're Washington or you're a team that Denver, for example, that's why we mocked the wide receiver to them. You want to make sure as quickly as possible that you have a conclusion on this quarterback, because you don't have that much time.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. The first is there are teams that have done it the other way around. So, the Raiders got into this kind of issue where they thought they had a quarterback. It turns out maybe they didn't. They had a guy in Khalil Mack, and they had to punt on him because what's the point of paying him all this money if you're trying to get from 6 to 7 wins, right? That doesn't help a franchise. How about this? Here's another way of thinking about it. In general, in all likelihood, Chase Young's not going to be there at 4. If he's there, does that change your opinion at all? Like, how great would Chase Young have to be, for that to make any sense?
I think I'd take Chase Young over any non-quarterback in this draft still, even positional values, whatever, taken into account, just because I think he is that good as a prospect, head and shoulders above in terms of every other positional player. And I think that edge rusher, it's difficult to capture what that does when you basically can't block that guy one-on-one. Like, it'll change an offense, and one of the things I think is difficult to account for just in purely analytics-based is play calling and how your one-on-one matchup that you're losing, that you know you're going to lose, impacts play calling. Because, he might not rack up 12 pressures every game, but when there is a mismatch that is him going up against an awful right tackle, you can't call the same plays you would otherwise. And that has an impact that you're just not going to be able to ever calculate in terms of his play-by-play grading or that sort of thing.
Don't use
not,
the word
not
ever.
ever, but that we can. I don't think we can calculate right now in terms of that.
Our friend Jason Fitzgerald made a great point. We were talking about Bosa and his effect on the Niners last year.
Yeah.
And I think this rings true about Chase Young as well. There's also the way the market is structured. So if you look at, for example, Saquon Barkley, and he's drafted as a running back and gets the second overall salary, he's immediately a top 5 paid player at the position.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at Nick Bosa here, he's paid less APY than Jabal Sheard, right? And Ezekiel Anza, who's and Jerry Hughes and Justin Houston, and guys that have lower tier salaries. So if edge is a need for you, right, and you have the coverage resolved, right?
Yeah.
That's the issue, is they try to, teams try to make edge the cover up for everything. But if you have certain things figured out, like the Niners kind of did going into last year, then they are a cheap option at at a position where they can be elite relatively quickly, and we're able to predict them better.
What do you think Chase Young's his average outcome, if he hits his average, what kind of effect? Like, give me a player that he impacts the game like.
So I think his average outcome, if he stays healthy, assuming health, would be, that's a good question. So at least, what we've seen from probably Myles Garrett, I think.
Okay.
We've seen, he's just, everything about him coming out is as good or better than Myles Garrett.
So, and then your top receiver, which is Jerry Jeudy, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think his average outcome is?
What's like a good receiver who's not? Maybe like a Golden Tate.
Oh,
would
interesting.
be his average outcome if things didn't go great. So you're getting a good wide receiver, not necessarily. And I think you can obviously push higher, but I think it's your average.
So then the question then becomes is what's more valuable to a team, Myles Garrett or Golden Tate? And I think that our research would suggest that Golden Tate is more valuable. The hard part is selling that to a fan. That's the hard part, is that we always
because no one's going to argue that Golden Tate is a better player at his position, and that's the hard thing to strip away. It's hard for me to even think about it. You watch the game and you go, this guy's dominating. Mm-hmm. This guy's got 7 catches for 87 yards. It's a nondescript sort of thing, whereas this guy's got 2 sacks and he's crushed this offensive tackle 4 times. And it's very clear that one player is better, but value and who plays better at their position are different.
Well, let's put this on the same playing field. If you look at the 49ers, their top 2 picks last year, who added more value to the team?
That's a good question. Who would you say, Mike?
I'd probably say Nick Bosa.
I think I would say Deebo Samuel, because I think that offense, he was picking up chunks and chunks and chunks of yards. He made the offense acknowledge him when he was on the field and opened things up for Sanders and Porn and Kittle. And that's the crazy thing, because I think unequivocally Nick Bosa is a better player.
That's not even close.
Yeah, so that's really the tricky part about thinking about edge versus receiver. But then again, it's all about the what you have to pay too, because I think you could probably get somebody in free agency like Deebo Samuel for closer to a rookie deal than you can get somebody who's of the caliber of Nick Bosa. As I just talked about, there's edge players who are half the player that Nick Bosa are, that you have to pay the same amount of money to.
I should be clear. You are not under obligation. There's no rule that says, hey, you have to go pay an edge rusher.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to looking at the receivers specifically, because our projections love Henry Ruggs, and it was something where we were going to get. We thought Jeudy was going to be our number 1 guy. We would have mocked him to the Giants. Ruggs ended up ahead of him, and we said, well, we can't call this a mock based on math and punt on this guy. So first off, talk about the kind of difference between Jeudy, Lamb, and Ruggs, and then maybe where are your tiers at with wide receivers?
So I think they're all. So I think it's the tier one is Judy and Lamb because they're just complete. Like they can do everything about the position you could possibly want. Get off the line of scrimmage, run route tree at the short, intermediate, deep level, and I think they do a lot of things about the receiver position that, in terms of their route running ability, the way they track the ball, the way they attack the ball, that you need to be successful in the NFL. And then I kind of put Ruggs almost on his own tier just below that in terms of you feel really good about what he brings to the table being effective in the NFL, but he's not, we touched on this before, he's not a complete receiver. And he's not necessarily, we touched on this when you went into the analytics, Mike, he's not necessarily a complete receiver.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of you're not going to ask him, like I said earlier, it's third down, you need a guy to get open, man coverage, run a slant, he might not get open. Like he did, Christian Fulton, that was a play this year. Christian Fulton ran a slant against him, and Christian Fulton's in his hip pocket because he's not super sudden, super talented at the line of scrimmage yet. Like that's just not his game quite yet. So he's not near the route runner that those guys are.
Ball was a little behind him.
It was. Wherever it was going to be, Christian Fulton was going to be in it because it wasn't that great of a route. So I do think that there are limitations to that, and that's not necessarily. I'd rather have the guy that can win at all levels, even if he might not be quite as good a deep threat. But like CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy were very good deep. Like when they went deep, like they are talented route runners and have enough speed to get open down the football field to where I'm not going to. I don't think it's. Yes, Ruggs is probably better in that regard, but it's not night and day.
Interesting. Does the fact that Jeudy played so much out of the slot and that it's so much easier to win in the slot, did that?
It impacts it, obviously, but if you just watch him out wide and then watch him against press coverage, it was almost even better. Like,
he was very good.
He was just deadly. The release he had against Lavert Hill in the Michigan game, and Michigan plays a ton of press, man. And
Lavert Hill looks really good in our grades, metrics, all that kind of stuff. And
it's like when you go up against Michigan, who plays a ton of press man, he goes for over 200 yards in the bowl game. That's indicative of who he is. It's just a guy you're not going to be able to stick with one-on-one.
Did he test far lower than you expected? Because we look at one of the things that we look at and weigh fairly decently that is part of the model is the athleticism. Mm-hmm. And Henry Ruggs is in. I hate to use this guy because he's not this guy, right? But like Tyreek Hill, that cluster of athleticism. Whereas Jerry Jeudy is more in, let's say, Devontae Adams, but he's not as big a guy. But you get what I'm saying.
The shuttle time being awful was weird. But also, like, everyone's shuttle time was bad at the Combine. It was just a weird year, and people were just pulling out left and right. So I'll hold off to the pro day. But he's not a guy who so CeeDee Lamb can break tackles. Judy's going to make you miss after the catch. He's not a guy who where his legs are kind of weak. If you catch him, if you make contact with him, he's probably not going to break a tackle. So he's not that kind of guy. He's not like super explosive laterally, but he's just so quick, and I'm not too worried about the testing, but it was worse than I expected, we'll say.
Yeah, and I would classify it as passable except for that, the shuttle. But then you also look at, Ruggs, for me, it's not just the deep speed. The 4.27, 4.28 was complemented by a 42-inch vertical, which just shows explosiveness.
Yeah. It's the basketball, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and you look at, our thought process about wide receivers is, okay, you need to get a complete guy. You need to get a guy. I always think of like Mike Evans, even though I don't think he's complete, but he's sort of that guy that he can go downfield, he can go underneath, he's physical, he can get behind people. And like those receivers, if you try to draft that receiver every single time, you're going to fail far more than if you take a guy like, Ruggs, or even Lamb and Jeudy are this way too, but you take a guy like that and you accentuate what they do well. You look at Tyreek Hill, as George said, for Kansas City, he's a guy that can get contested catches, even though he's not particularly big. Yeah. And it's because he always has the DB uncomfortable, right? Like, if you're worried about that deep speed, you're not going to be as good at stopping on a dime and then jumping with the guy.
To be fair, and Mike, correct if I'm wrong, one of the things that I thought in watching Ruggs was I was very surprised at his ability to do exactly that. Like, he made some very impressive catches down the field with a receiver draped all over him. And one of the things I think about is this. Is the reason we're looking for a complete receiver because we're looking at a team just void of all talent. If you put both these guys, let's say both of them went to the Chiefs, would you then change your mind because, Andy Reid is actually just going to take whatever they do best and have them do that?
No, so that's the thing. It's like I assume you're going to utilize him in his best role for this ranking, and I assume you're going to utilize Henry Ruggs. If you just stick him on the outside and that's going to be an X, like that's not going to be his best role. His best role would be sort of like Tyreek Hill, would be this chess piece that if you're moving him around, jet sweeps, that sort of thing, like defenses don't know where he's going to be, and then take him vertical from the slot all of a sudden, and you're one-on-one with safety. So I think that is his best role, but even still, I'd probably lean Jeudy because the 4.45, I thought he was faster than that, like the played faster than that in terms of how he affected defensive backs on the football field. And then the other thing of Henry Ruggs, yes, he has a deep speed, but like he wasn't productive deep though at Alabama. Like he really wasn't. He had the 4th most deep catches on Alabama this past year, and that's kind of yes. I mean, like you see it like there's a unique situation there at play. It's not just any other guy who runs a 4.2. It's not Philip Dorsett only having a handful of deep catches at Miami. This is a little different situation. But it's still kind of like why were they giving Devontae Smith the go balls and not Henry Ruggs sort of thing? They're just like you need to see a guy do it more to feel more comfortable.
I think it's interesting that you put the tiers like that. With those two guys in the first, because I always think within tiers it's like okay, well whatever. I mean, there's the differences are small, so it's interesting to me that you would separate Lamb and Jeudy, and then Ruggs. What would be your third tier?
So I would almost even put Shenault in that Ruggs tier if like the health were not an issue there. Because to me, Ruggs and Shenault do two things to have like trump cards that you just know are going to translate. Ruggs with the speed, ability down the football field. Shenault just after the catch. He's just dynamic. You're going to get the ball in his hands some way, and he's going to make plays happen after the catch. So those guys I feel really good about doing those things, but then Shenault with the injuries, they're just a lot at this point. So my tier after that would probably be Jalen Reagor from TCU, T. Higgins from Clemson, Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State, and then Denzel Mims from Baylor is probably tier 2 for me.
And Higgins is going to be one of those. And to your point about a lot of these guys haven't tested in their pro day yet, Higgins not as great of a pro day today in terms of the explosiveness thing, but did garner a ton of targets and a ton of air yards in a Clemson offense that was very good. So he's got a lot going for him, but we had him not even go in the first round as a result of some of those issues.
Make an argument for me about why I would take T. Higgins over Justin Jefferson.
So T. Higgins offers more in terms of just the size matchup potential. I think that there's still something to that in the NFL. If you had a 6'4" wide receiver against a 5'9" cornerback, that's a matchup that you can just attack and feel good about. And maybe it's not like a fade in the end zone, but maybe it's a back shoulder fade, which he was excellent at, and he has great body control. I mean, I think in terms of just their ball skills and body control, they're neck and neck in that regard. And I just think Higgins has done it more from the outside. I think he has good enough speed to win on the outside. And I think he's just a little more physical.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that because one of the things for me with Ruggs versus Jeudy is Ruggs, and Jeudy did win from the outside, but Ruggs played primarily outside. Jeudy did a lot from the slot. And I look then at this between Jefferson and Higgins. It's like, okay, I get that Justin Jefferson was in the slot all the time, but he did have some of those explosive, metrics where you go, why wouldn't I be able to see this guy winning at different places on the field.
And so my biggest thing is just like going back to a sophomore, he did play outside, and I did not love his ability to separate there. This was why. And obviously he develops as a player. He's older now.
Gets Joe.
And so,
he
gets
the whole offense.
So, there is like people do develop. It's not something that's just writing him off. It's just what you feel more comfortable about and weighing risk.
No, it's interesting. Okay, tiers for the tackles.
Okay, tiers for the tackles. I got a tier 1 that's 4 players, and this is the best tackle class I've seen since we started grading tackles here. Andrew Thomas from Georgia, Jedrick Wills from Alabama, Tristan Wirfs from Iowa, and Josh Jones from Houston. 4 guys, and then there's kind of a tier below that I call like the wild card tier, and it's Kai Becton.
Wow.
So that's tier 1 and then a half, and then tier 2 I'd put Ben Barch from St. John's, Jack Driscoll from Auburn, and Ezra Cleveland from Boise State.
The Becton one is so interesting to me because that's like basically all measurables, right?
So I mean, there is on field to some, like he has dominant blocks in the run game. Like I feel good about that. There is something to him in pass pro, and there also is something to the fact that they just did not develop him, or he was screwed up his first 2 years at Louisville. Like flipping him sides play to play. You're gonna suck. You're gonna suck in pass pro. So
shouldn't the default be okay? Then let me just kind of not over or underreact to that. Mm-hmm. So like not just because he was screwed up by his coaching doesn't mean he's going to be awesome. Doesn't mean he's going to be terrible. it means I don't know. And wouldn't your goal be to say, let me try and know more about, who I'm picking?
Yeah.
So like I look at a guy like an Ezra Cleveland, like a Jack Driscoll, guys that Jack Driscoll's so solid.
Yeah. He's great. I love Jack Driscoll.
And it's like, okay, if I'm looking at putting my offensive line together, the one thing I can't have a disaster there. Like, that's the one thing I can't have. If I get average, that's great.
Well, and we know, this is another tricky thing. So we wrote about this on the website today. It was like offensive line. It's about like your third best blocker, because if you have issues in just one or two spots, like your offensive is going to be screwed, regardless of whether or not you get a Tyron Smith, right?
Yeah.
And so. And then we also know our colleague Timo Risky wrote, like, tackle is a place where you just have that steep learning curve. And so if you're drafting for tackle for need in 2020, like you have to consider all of those things and think about Mekhi Becton. It's somebody, I think he has probably a higher probability of becoming a Tyron Smith, but he also has a higher probability of just being like a TJ Clemmings.
I thought you were going to use your boy that doesn't know how to use Google Maps from this offseason.
Oh yeah, but if you had if he's a Willie Beavers or a TJ Clemmings, right, and your total offense is screwed, and that's why I think if you're a team like Green Bay and you retain Balaga, that's a good pick, right? Yep. But if you're a team that needs an offensive lineman like the Cleveland Browns, maybe somebody who's a little bit more solid with less upside is probably a better pick at this point.
One of the things that I thought was really cool is in reading your write-ups in the draft guide, which, by the way, everyone needs. If you don't leverage that, regardless of what you're doing, you're an idiot. It's fantastic. Yeah. NFL teams use it. There's no level of NFL fan that couldn't benefit from this. You talked a lot about looking at how, what are their fundamentals in their pass sets.
Yeah.
And when we, are using a mathematical model to project things, that is something that it's not explicitly seen by the model, right? So if a guy can get by and perform really well with poor pass sets, he's still going to grade well in our system.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. Is there a guy who maybe is on the flip side of that who didn't grade as well, but you have him higher because of how good he looks on film doing what he does?
That's a good question. I will say,
is Jedrick Wills that guy?
Yeah, I guess Jedrick Wills is probably that guy. He didn't have a great pass protection grade this past year. It was good, but I think you see just the explosiveness and you see the rawness in his pass sets in terms of his feet can be cleaned up fairly easily. He has all the athleticism to do the things you need to do at tackle, and that's kind of Ezra Cleveland too. He didn't have great grades if you adjust for competition. He was only around 82 or something pass blocking grade this last year, but that's at Boise State. You shouldn't be losing. You should be looking like Josh Jones if you're a real deal first round type of prospect against lesser competition. But I do think that both of those guys have just half of pass protection is, can you mirror a 250-pound guy who's running a 4.4? And those guys can. And those guys have no issues with that whatsoever. And with everyone at offensive tackle, even the best guys in this class, have so far to come in terms of pass protecting at the NFL level. You see, if you have that high base to work with, you don't have to go as far in terms of the technical aspect. You only need to get a little bit, and then you feel more comfortable about those guys.
Yeah, Wills was a guy that did not look nearly as good in our projections, and was one that we really struggled with because of what your assessment was. I think it's fascinating. Okay, we have a couple more questions. We're going to run through these kind of quick. Let's talk about the interior. Derek Brown, Javon Kinlaw, guys that you've mocked in the first round.
Yes.
I don't know what your next mock is going to look like, but are you still taking those guys in the first?
Yes.
Also, Muti, a guard.
Sure.
Look at the other side of the ball too.
I think they're that good in terms of defensive tackle prospects that we've seen in recent years. And
what does
I've come around.
What does that good mean?
Meaning that you feel that there will be
Fletcher Cox,
floor,
Aaron Donald.
They have a high floor, high floor. When it's all said and done, they will be the top 32 in this draft class in terms of WAR at. Is how I act. Is how I think about yes, they might not be there will be guys drafted later than them that will be better, but I feel they both have pretty high floors in terms of. When it's all said and done, they will be top 32 players in this draft class. And at the end of the day, you can chase upside, you can chase other positions, but if you if you get a guy like that, you're probably going to be solid. And I've kind of come around on run defense for defensive tackles, especially with, war. If teams are still running, stopping the run still has a ton of value. And so
that's how you come back from, when you're down 14. You stop the run and get the ball back.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it is a good point to what you're saying is like we sometimes make, George and I sometimes will make assumptions about,
False.
okay, if the league were optimal, this would not matter. And to your point, defensively, you don't get the chance to dictate what an offense does. So there are going to be teams that run too much on you, and if you can't stop it, it's not as bad as teams passing on you and you not being able to stop it, but there is some value in being able to hold serve as a defense. In run defense, it's not as valuable as nearly everybody thinks.
Here's what I think, the way I think of it. If I am a fan of one of these teams and they take a defensive tackle in the first round, I tuned in for this.
I guess it depends on where you're at as a franchise and who's on the board. But like a top 10 in this class, no, I'm not taking either of these guys. You talk to me like if you're the Vikings and one of those are sitting there for you, I'd probably take them.
If you're a non-playoff team, to me, it's like I need to make a move that is dramatic because I'm trying to make the playoffs here, and theoretically, if I'm like 10 through 24-ish, I've got some players, a quarterback maybe that I feel decent about, and it's like, is defensive tackle really the piece? Like I can go sign a guy who can be a decent run stopper.
And there's not a good track record of defensive tackles coming to the NFL year one and blowing it. Like that's not a position where it usually happens right away because there's such like a different, like the power level difference between you're going from 18-year-olds you're facing to grown men at those positions is very different.
Aaron Donald was fucking amazing. Like the guy was incredible, and his team was a total disaster.
Well,
even J.J. Watt wasn't great though. Year one, he was solid, but not great.
The outliers are the Quentin Nelsons and the Aaron Donalds, but the old adage that the closer you are to the ball, the harder it is to transition from college to pro or high school to college, I think is extremely true. And then now that we're finding that those things are less valuable, is really why our mock draft has corners, wide receivers, safeties, playmaking linebackers, and then tackles because. Yeah. Not only are you making a bad bet in the sense that, Quinton Williams is going to be a monster in year one, the cards are stacked against him by virtue of just how close to the football he is.
Yeah. All right, that was decently quick. We'll make this one even quicker. Jalen Hurts, he did some things on the football field that mathematically look decent.
Yes.
Completed some passes above what you'd expect. And I think about a guy like, Dak Prescott. Mm-hmm. He was taken in, third, fourth, fifth round. You could have picked him anywhere in there and been like, okay, I'm taking a flyer. Why is Hurts different than that? Or do you think that's comparable and that's a guy worth taking a flyer on?
I think his accuracy is just worse, purely, anecdotally. I'll say I don't have a number right now to back that up from, but I think his accuracy is worse. And his just ability to make quick decisions with the football is night and day from what Dak was. Dak could throw in rhythm consistently. Jalen Hurts just that's not been his game whatsoever at any stop of his career at this point.
Yeah, you go ahead.
I was going to say you can cover that up to a large part with scheme.
Yeah.
Which it seemed to be what Oklahoma's doing. Sorry.
Yeah, and it is troubling that you look at Mayfield, Murray, they all had more success as passers than Hurts did because that would imply, his numbers look good for us, right? But, and not, his projections not nearly as good as those two men were. And then the other issue is, for me, I'm looking at him, and it has to be a pretty perfect situation and a situation where you can accentuate his running. Because his running is interesting. His running isn't the Kyler Murray running. No. It's not the Lamar Jackson. No. It's I remember the Baylor game. He literally.
I don't even quite think it's Tyrod Taylor. It's a little different than that.
He's delivering hits when he's running the football.
He's more Cam Newton for sure.
Right.
And he's not Cam Newton.
And people I would say give him a try at quarterback, but he is actually somebody who could have some value as a running back because he does run like a running back. It's not like one of those.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not one of those. It's not one of those Lamar Jackson.
What if you put him at running back?
I do think if you are like the Ravens and he's there in the third round, that's well worth in terms of backup quarterback value because that's the situation you would need to be in.
And they're smart enough to be able to figure out a game plan on the fly that would make him have the sort of open windows he'd need to succeed.
Taysom Hill Part 2. All right, you have your guys every year.
Yeah.
Chris Jones was the first your guy.
Yeah, that's one of my first.
Give us a little taste.
All right. I love, and this is going to be very homerish to me, but I love Julian Aguara from Notre Dame. Two edge rushers.
That is
It's a
very
weak edge
homerish.
class. Julian Aguara, we'll see at the Notre Dame Pro Day. He's a freak athletically. He runs hot and cold, but like his hot is as good as anyone's in this draft class. Right up with Chase Young. Like he dominated some games that were just like unblockable because he's physically a freak and has all the length, size, whatever. Like he has this perceived upside that like he has all the tools to win on the edge. I'll also say Curtis Weaver from Boise State. I think he doesn't look the part whatsoever, but his 7-second 3 count is more indicative of the way he wins. And if you're projecting the NFL, you have to have one way to win, I think, that like is very, very good. You can't just be all-around guy who's like average athlete who does a lot of things well. No, you have to do something really well that people have to worry about as offensive tackles. He can get to the edge and bend back to the quarterback really well, Curtis Weaver. So I like him. I like Netani Muti, the guard from Fresno State. He did 44 reps at the combine.
Would you take him in the first round?
Probably not.
Okay.
But
Me neither.
Yeah.
Eric really tried to give him to my Niners, and I said, you can go fuck yourself.
but he is a monster. This guy is
Yeah.
fantastic. And then Geno Stone from the safety from Iowa, another one of my guys. He's the most instinctive safety in this class. The guy, he has some incredible plays. There's a play against USC where he breaks on a hitch route for Michael Pittman, dives at the ball, swings, misses because the ball didn't even get thrown there. He never looked back to see if the ball was thrown. The ball was not there. But just like a play like that he trusted himself that much to go dive at a guy who wasn't even getting thrown the ball. I'll put my pin in a guy like that.
All right. There you have it. Mike, appreciate it, brother.
Thanks for having me,
Thank you,
fellas.
sir.
Yeah. It's fun again.
We are going to take a quick break to talk to you while Mike subs out for your boy Sam Monson, who's outside waiting. The creators of Cold Case Files and PD Stories comes the next great true crime podcast, I Survived. Every week, I Survived presents chilling first-person accounts from people who overcame deadly situations, allowing the survivors to describe the event as they unfold and how they made it out alive. If you love true crime, you are going to love I Survived. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, PodcastOne.com, Apple Podcasts, and many other podcast apps so you can get all the new episodes every week. I should also mention that, look, there's not a lot of things right now to bet on sports-wise. So maybe you're thinking long-term, and that should give you some time to plan a trip out to Vegas to sign up for the Super Contest. And if you do so, you should go to footballcontest.com. That is the proxy service that we use, and they're absolutely fantastic, super professional. It's not expensive. They make it really easy to do. Go check them out. They are awesome. Sam, what's up, brother?
Hey, can I get a Lysol wipe? I'm not concerned about Corona. I just don't know where Mike has been.
Where Mike has been? Here, have a Lysol wipe. I would be concerned as well. Now, in fairness, I'm using the mic that you usually use on the NFL show, and I wiped it down.
Well, that one's definitely compromised.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's a question before we start talking football again. What is the appropriate amount of, because obviously we're kind of joking about this. What's the appropriate amount of joking about a pandemic? Because I
don't
feel like it's part coping, right?
Yep.
So it's that, like, coping with the fact that there are still people like in this town that are like trying, like,
That are like out there shaking hands with
open
people on the
mouth
street.
kissing other people on the street. And then
I've seen multiple people in Cincinnati who I've never seen before standing on street corners offering free hugs.
So and
I don't know
but
how
of
many of
course
them
it's
work for our
serious
company,
because
but
it's serious because people like will legitimately die from this. So it's like, fuck, how do you even?
here's what I would say. If you're taking it seriously, then you are allowed to have a little fun with it because we need comedic relief. We need some things to get us through being quarantined in our homes.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here.
Not
today.
being able to bet on sports for weeks and months.
I mean, that's the real tragedy.
That's the real one.
I just holding on. Maybe. Well, I would imagine by end of day today, all the other events will probably be.
Okay, so this is a good question to start it off. I was sitting there last night watching the NBA, wondering what the hell is next. I figured it's the NCAA tournament, and then I go, I'm writing out like our content schedule for free agency, which is a huge week for us. And I go, oh shit, like, are they going to have free agency?
When we were at the coffee shop, I was like, how are they going to do free agent visits? And granted, people are like, oh, Skype and stuff, but like that's like
No.
They like some yeah, they're not doing that.
No.
Like the NFL is going to be I mean,
What do you think, Sam?
I think there's a pretty good chance that free agency gets pushed back. I mean, the other thing is, yeah, you're right. These are visits, right? These are a ton of players crisscrossing the nation in planes. Now,
Private.
granted, they're private planes, and that's going to help,
Yeah.
right? But there's still a bunch of people that have to be on those things doing all this stuff. Plus, the optics of you just carrying on business as usual while like every other major sport in the world gets canned is not ideal.
well, and the other thing is delaying it. Here's the funny thing about delaying it. It's like what amount of delaying it's actually going to be sufficient? Because if this, unlike our colleague who said this would be done in 3 weeks, it's not going to be done in 3 weeks. It's going to be, if this thing is real enough, and we all believe it is, it's going to be a couple months. And then now we're talking about like being the NBA and having the draft first or what,
Right.
And it all sort of, it's not one of those things where if we delay it a week, that's not going to be sufficient. We either go through with it or we don't, and we wait until maybe like August or something to have free agency, which is a catastrophe.
Could you just delay everything and do free agency the week before the draft?
I mean, that would make for some awesome content,
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is there's a decent portion right now of we don't know what this is going to look like.
Yeah.
So all we know is that next week free agency with this hanging over it would kind of be chaos plus bad optics.
Right.
Let's indefinitely suspend it and then figure out what the lay of the land is in a couple of weeks. And then we can figure out like what the alternatives are, right? Whether it's your Skype visits to the facility.
I mean, we've deliberately avoided ever thinking about something like this happening before, and so hence we're dealing with that right now.
It's going to be fascinating. Let's talk about free agency, though, as if it will happen at some point.
Yeah.
And Sam, you have been thinking very deeply about the actual performance of free agents for a long time, since before either of us were at this company.
Right.
Do you ever feel as though going into free agency, okay, free agency it has a legit chance to save a franchise? Like, is that ever your feeling?
Probably not, because I mean the only way of really saving a franchise is with a quarterback, right? And the chances of you very rarely hit franchise-defining quarterbacks in free agency at all. They just don't hit the open market. Now, this year might be. Because,
So is this the first year?
right? Because you've got a Tom Brady, you've got a couple of people out there that could potentially be franchise-altering options at quarterback in a way that you just don't see.
A couple.
Well, so I think Phillip Rivers could alter a franchise for a year or two, right? And Brady obviously is a short-term option as well. I think there are options out there that could potentially change the direction of franchises, particularly because I think unusually there's a couple of teams in the NFL right now that kind of are a quarterback away from being good.
That's what I was going to say. Like, if the Colts weren't there and you were like, okay, Phillip Rivers is going to go, to a Chargers-esque team,
Right.
you'd be like, all right, well,
That's not
I've seen
changing
this.
anything,
Yeah.
right? But the difference between a Jacoby Brissett and a Phillip Rivers could easily propel the Colts into the playoffs. The same thing with Chicago, right? You replace Trubisky with anybody viable.
Us three.
Yeah, and suddenly you've got a team that can actually go back to the postseason and contend again. So, yeah, I think it's a weird year in terms of quarterback availability and teams that are kind of in the quarterback market and wouldn't necessarily want to do it in the draft and try and contend in day one with a rookie.
When I think about Phillip Rivers, it kind of reminds me of Brett Favre a little bit in the sense that when Favre went to the Jets, his final season looked really bad down the stretch. He had bad arm strength. He threw a lot of interceptions. And he clearly, at that point in time, didn't want to be there anymore. He goes to Minnesota. He gets rejuvenated, right? Like, Rivers kind of had a really bad year last year.
Right.
And he was like, his arm strength didn't look good. The offense that he ran didn't look great. And yet, at the same time, like, he goes to somewhere like Indianapolis and it sort of builds his strengths and works with him. I think the results could even be better than what Favre had because he'll probably have even like training camp and all that stuff that Favre never did.
To me, the thing with these old quarterbacks, and in particular Rivers and Brady, is that I think they can both still play, but they've reached a point in their careers where they need more help than they did before. And in particular, like Rivers, it's pass protection, right? The Chargers have spent a decade plus completely unable to ever put a passable offensive line in front of Phillip Rivers. And he's had years where that was a problem, and he wasn't able to overcome just how bad the offensive line was. And then he's had years where he was able to. He was able to rise above the disastrous collection of pass blockers in front of him and play really well. I think his ability to do that now is just, it's not there anymore. So if you're going to get good Phillip Rivers, you need to put a certain level of offensive line in front of him. And I think the same thing is probably true with Tom Brady, and it extends to the wide receivers as well. Like Brady, the days where Brady could take random 5 collection of receivers that nobody else would give the time of day to and take them to a Super Bowl, that's gone. That's not happening anymore. But you give Brady some guys that can get open, he can still play among the best quarterbacks in the NFL.
Do you think, because I have this idea in my head that Brady is really, everyone says he's the first domino, but I almost see it as that's not the case. We don't know who the first domino is, only Brady does, because Brady's sitting there and going, I know that I need a receiver to get open so I can throw them the ball.
Right.
And either the Patriots are going to get one or some other team is going to have one, and that's where I'm going to target. Who is that guy? Like, is it Amari Cooper?
I mean, it should be, right? There's some teams out there that have the kind of cap space that can go after Amari Cooper, and a couple of those make some sense for Brady. I think for him, for the Patriots, it's such an interesting dynamic, right? Because there's a bunch of things that are kind of waiting for other things to happen. So the Patriots somehow need to convince Tom Brady to come back, and the only way they can do that is by proving to him that they're willing to invest in the areas that were bad.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't seem their style. They don't seem desperate ever.
That
for
too,
anything.
but also, is Brady going to sit around and wait until that happens, or?
Well, he can't really. I mean, it would cost them an extra $6.5 million if he doesn't sign kind of right at the moment. I mean,
Right.
Pending when free agency happens. But like for them to be fiscally responsible, he's going to have to actually sign right at that moment. So that would mean they'd kind of have to get everything, all their ducks in a row,
Right.
and have all these pieces fall into place. I wonder if, who are the second tier guys on? So I wonder about like a Robbie Anderson, for example. Mm-hmm. That's a guy that isn't going to command as much. He can get downfield, something they haven't had at all. If the Patriots can lure him, up the road from where he is currently, does that help enough?
Yeah, well, so I think it definitely helps. Whether it helps enough to convince Brady that it's enough, because part of the thing with the Patriots, right, is that I'm sure they are going to be looking at their in-house options and expecting them to be better in 2020 than they were in 2019, right? Mm-hmm. You had Julian Edelman, he was hurt for some of the year. You had Mohamed Sanu, who was hurt much of the year. N'Keal Harry missed most of his rookie year and was a rookie.
And was
a first-round pick.
Yeah.
So I don't like N'Keal Harry at all in terms of a draft pick. I think the idea that he was the guy that tempted the Patriots back into the first round for a receiver
hilarious.
Blows my mind. But if he was, they have to be assuming that N'Keal Harry is better than he showed last year. So that's now 3 guys in-house that you expect to be better than a year ago. None of them would be convincing Tom Brady to do anything, though.
There's a significant chance that the Patriots think that if they just get a tight end, the
right.
offense would be better, right? I mean, and I think that's probably unconvincing to Brady.
I agree. So the thing is, they might not be wrong, but is it enough to convince Tom Brady that he should come back for one more go-around?
And to that point, like if you're thinking long-term about the Patriots, that might be the better decision to make, which is to ride it out with some of the players they have. They had 5 compensatory picks, 2 in the 3rd round, if I remember correctly. Like maybe it's just time to rebuild, and maybe that's like the sort of part we're missing. We talked about this the other day. The Patriots haven't made an offer to Brady. That's two-way.
Right. This is why I've been saying kind of all the way along that it feels like the time they're going to separate, right? Yeah. I think for both sides it kind of makes some sense. I also think on a personal level, this has been almost 20 years of which guy is responsible for this dynasty. I think both individuals, Belichick and Brady, want the chance to prove that it's them, not the other one. So I think Brady would love nothing more than to go somewhere else and stick it to the Patriots for a year. And I think Belichick wants to prove that he can do it without Brady.
Okay, I disagree. I think it's close to that, but it's not quite that. They both want a little bit. They both want some of the credit. Mm-hmm. Brady, to me, is sitting there going, I just want a little bit more respect. Like, I've been a part of this relationship for this long time, and I've just continually said, look, I don't need to be respected, pay me whatever. But now I'm old, and I think he really wants to come back. It's just that he needs just a little budge.
Yeah, to me it just seems like an odd time to start to care about that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like if you were willing to take the relative hometown discount, right? It's not like he's been doing this for $5 million a year because he could. like he's taken a bit of a discount, which has enabled him to get like an extra slot receiver a year, right? Which is useful, but it's not like it's franchise defining.
Yeah.
So if
to
he was
me,
willing to do that all along, why would you suddenly be like, look, unless you're willing to be out there, pay me as the best quarterback in the NFL, you know, make it visually so that it's all me. Like, why am I coming back?
yeah, it's Kobe Bryant-esque. It's like asking to be paid as the best player in the NFL because you were the best player
Right.
at one point and you're not anymore. And I'm not sure that he's that oblivious to the truth. I would like to think that he's a little more cognizant of his current space. And when it comes down to it, to me, he's got to say, where can I win? And it's certainly with the Patriots if they are better. It's got to be super hard to go into a place that's totally new and acclimate to that. And if it takes 2 to 3 years, like he doesn't have that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why, we've seen that, Tampa Bay is making a run at him, right, it looks like. And that's one of those places where, you don't actually have to supplement that team with additional receiving talent. I mean, the only adjustment that they have to make is probably targeting O.J. Howard more. But, like, Evans and Godwin are the best receiving duo in the league. The offensive line is passable. They have as good of a, offensive line as the Patriots had last year. And, and their defense was, and I didn't realize this until I wrote the article about defensive play callers. The defense was top 10 in the league in EPA allowed and yards per play allowed. That's the spot, right? I mean, and they have 80 million in cap space.
They started to get really good on defense towards the back end of the year.
Yeah.
Like all those young guys started to make a ton of plays
Right.
on the football, started to become really good looking coverage defenders. That defense is definitely moving in the right direction.
They're a team, I think, so we took their over 6.5. Even if they were to retain Jameis, I still think we'd bet their over because they're one of those teams where the periphery doesn't look good. They were, I think, 28th in points allowed, but almost all of that was because Jameis would throw interceptions. Like they would get stuck at 14-0 or something. But defensively, they were solid, and we gave them a ton of praise for drafting, coverage linebacker and then DB, and then they got rid of Vernon Hargraves, who stinks, and then now you got Todd Bowles in the mix, a good play caller, Bruce Arians. I think Bruce Arians is smart enough also to adjust what he does to Brady, and to Brady's credit, he's improved substantially as a deep ball thrower, probably since you wrote that article about him being done.
Yeah, that seemed to change a lot of things in Brady's game.
I'm sorry.
I don't think you were wrong, actually, but he just fundamentally altered his game.
He really did.
Yeah.
There is no way in hell that Tom Brady is going to move to Tampa.
Tampa is like an underrated
Stop it. No, it's not underrated.
I think you're letting, and granted, you have great taste, but you're letting your taste alter your analysis.
You're letting your taste, or lack thereof, alter your opinion of underrated.
So he's not gonna, because like.
Come on. Sam, back me up on this. This is ridiculous.
It might be underrated, but it's still not good.
Better weather? They play in monsoons twice a year.
Yeah, but Brady plays in the cold. Like Steve like
It's football weather.
Steve waxes poetic daily about how good Brady is throwing outdoors.
Tampa is an underrated city is the most ridiculous thing you've ever said.
It's by definition underrated because no one likes it.
There you go. So I think there's a reasonable chance that it's both underrated and still bad.
Yeah. But
That's ridiculous.
Look, if it lured Jeff Garcia once.
Okay.
Jeff Garcia.
Sam, where do you think he ends up?
Where do I think he ends up? So I would love to see him in a couple of spots, and they're the teams we've kind of already mentioned in terms of being a quarterback away from contending. Can you imagine him in Indianapolis? That has a lot of things going for it. One,
no, I actually can't imagine him in Indianapolis.
George thinks Indianapolis is worse than
Getting
Tampa Bay.
burnt to a crisp steaks at St. Elmo's.
it's not necessarily it's not the Hollywood lifestyle that he's going to be looking for, but it has a team that has one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. They've got a receiving weapon, let's say. They can add more. They've got space to do it. They've got the draft and free agency coming up to make that happen. And they're inside. As much as, again, indoors, outdoors, it doesn't matter that much. But when you're talking about a 42-year-old who starts to need more help than he did before, I would say that moves a needle in terms of what he can achieve. So the Colts, I think, would be a fantastic fit for him. I've always kind of liked the Chargers, but the same problem Rivers had, Brady would now have, right? Can he play behind that offensive line, and can they fix that offensive line? Because they've shown no evidence that they can in 15 years. So that would be an issue. That at least gives you the LA lifestyle that he's going to want.
And receivers that can get open.
That too. Yeah.
Which I think an underrated component of avoiding pressure is having guys that are open that you can get the ball to.
I mean, that was New England this year,
Yeah.
right? Is that a lot of people were saying the offensive line was so much worse, Brady was so much worse. It's all down to the receivers. You start looking at it, Brady held onto the ball longer than he ever has before because nobody was getting open. He was worse under pressure than he ever was before because even when he held onto the ball, till the point the pressure was there, nobody was open, so he still had nowhere to go with it. Like, the whole thing stems from the fact that he had no receivers. You fix that, and immediately the offensive line is dramatically better.
Okay, so you actually have to bet on this now.
Okay.
Who is he going to end up playing with?
I'm going with the Colts.
Okay.
I think the Rivers thing is a smokescreen, or not a smokescreen, just ill-advised. All the reasons that people are saying Rivers to the Colts apply to Brady too.
I like that because it falls in line with my thought that he really cares about winning more than anything else. And
Right.
I would agree that it's a good place to win.
And
Eric,
I think for
where does
that
he end up?
reason, I'm going to go with Tampa Bay. And here's why. Our Falcons, probably not going to be good again. Saints, there's going to be one season where the Saints fall off the table. This could be it. And Carolina is rebuilding. So it's one of those where, and the Colts have this going for them too, but Brady taking a team that had a losing record in this season and elevating them to being good. And to our point the other day when we talked about Dallas, the NFC is wide open.
Okay. He's going to end up back with the Patriots. But if he were to go anywhere, the place that he would go is Dallas.
Dallas.
But
So you think Dallas would punt on getting Dak Prescott signed long term to snag Brady for like the one?
Yeah, for $40 million.
Yeah, for like 1 year to finally get the playoff monkey
Look,
off their back.
The world's going crazy, man. We don't know how many
is,
years we
it's
have
true.
left, so you might need to play for now. All right, we talked about Brady for way longer than I anticipated. So let's get out of here on a couple of more kind of quick ones. There's going to be some players that are signed where you're just going to go, what the fuck just happened? Who are like the top three?
I mean, any of the edge rushers are kind of like that, right? On paper, it looks like a great group of edge rushers in free agency. There's a lot of guys with a lot of sacks, a lot of pressure even, but almost all of them have giant red flags screaming for something or other, right? Whether it's a huge proportion of their pressure was unblocked or clean up. That's like a Matthew Judon, a Marcus Golden, Dante Fowler. Whether it's a disproportionate amount of their pressure ended up in sacks. Sometimes it swings and you end up with Shaq Barrett,
yeah.
who is a good pass rusher, suddenly becomes the NFL sack leader. And, Bruce Arians like, we're keeping that guy around because he's the sack leader.
Yeah,
you
of
don't
course.
stumble across those guys every
No.
now and again. It's like,
Never
no, you
do.
don't. And you won't again with Shaq Barrett. Like, it just happened randomly last year. It's not going to happen again. Or whether it's just, they're good, not great. Guys like Jadeveon Clowney, who I think is still sort of riding this wave of like the Michigan hit in college, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
this
for sure.
physical freak. And then every now and again on Monday Night Football, he takes over a game because somebody's playing their backup left tackle. And it's like, this guy's incredible. It's like, well, not all the time he isn't. And you're going to need to pay him like that's the case. So any of those guys, I think there's going to be a monster deal somewhere for someone.
I think you bring up something that is a great point, which is, do you think most teams are wise about pressure? Because all these guys that have gotten to free agency are clearly there because their teams have not done the due diligence, haven't done what's necessary to keep them. They're not like, some of these guys you get, Marcus Lawrence gets a huge deal from Dallas, X, Y, and Z. Do you think teams know what you just said? Like they know intuitively, like, hey, this guy's getting a bunch of cleanup stuff and hence isn't as valuable as maybe the periphery stats would indicate?
No, I actually think generally the whole dynamics with sacks, pressure, and how the quality of each of those, even within the same statistic, I think teams are generally way behind on. Like, again, the idea that a guy can stumble into 20 sacks a season and somebody thinks that materially changes what he is as a player is crazy. Even then, so we've said for years that you should be focusing on pressure rather than the sack number. It's a bigger sample size. It's a more indicative figure. But even within that, right, we know that they're not all the same, right? You can have a pressure where you split a double team and whoop a guy in 1.5 seconds and you're the guy that destroyed the play. Or you can have a sack where the guy just sort of stumbled into you, the stray hand sack, right? Where Brett Favre just gives it up and you tap him down. in theory, the sack is a better play for the defense, but qualitatively, the pressure was significantly better.
Yeah.
You wrote a really nice article talking about running backs. I'm like, don't pay running backs. Here are the myriad of reasons why. And to me, the reason that I think people are coming around to it, but it's always hard to synthesize the reasons in a way that like anyone can understand. That's, I think, a real struggle for anyone out there that's trying to explain a nuanced concept. If you had like 60 seconds and you could give one reason that would try and convince someone like, don't pay Derrick Henry a ton of money,
Yeah.
what would it be?
I mean, I think it would be a quick sort of threefold thing, right? One, running backs are being shown time and time again to be more a product of their environment than they are the driving force behind the statistics, the production. Two, rookie running backs hit the ground running unlike any other position in the NFL. So it's the time to get them, right? And then three, like the second any of those things change, the second the environment around him changes, the production is not going to replicate itself. So if you remove the blocking from Derrick Henry, or you remove the Ryan Tannehill from Derrick Henry, who was playing so well last year, including like if Ryan Tannehill comes back and doesn't play the way Ryan Tannehill played, Henry's production is going to drop off. And he was 11th in the league in rushing, averaging 3.7 yards per carry when Mariota was the quarterback. Tannehill comes in, everything changes. The offensive line also got better, but they're not the thing driving running back production. And it's sad because like everybody loves watching guys carry the ball, right? It's fun. It's a fun part of football, and they might be the most sort of physically abused players in the NFL in terms of like just getting beat down every single play. So if anyone deserves, in quotation marks, to be paid, it's running backs. But all the data points you can pull they just say it shouldn't happen. It's a waste of resources that should go elsewhere.
We chase impressiveness in place of value in this position. And Derrick Henry was impressive last year, but ultimately speaking, not valuable until the table was set for him.
Yeah.
Poor guy. All right. On the flip side of this, players that you would be, if your team were to sign them, I'm not saying necessarily the Vikings, but like your team were to sign them.
My hypothetical team.
Yeah, you'd be happy about that signing.
So I think the value in free agency is always in the second wave and the bargain basement and the guys that for whatever reason crapped out of their previous team, right? There's a lot of reasons where players for whatever reason just don't succeed in the first instance. And a lot of it also is where perception changes, right? If you're a first round pick and you became a solid player, a lot of teams are unhappy with that because he wasn't the superstar they thought he was when they drafted him. But if you're the second team going, well, if this guy's available for peanuts, I'll quite happily take a solid player for a bargain contract. So I think there's a ton of those guys. You know, reclamation project guys, I'm massively intrigued by Brashad Perriman. I think what he saw at the tail end of last season when he basically became a starter for the Bucs, 3 back-to-back 100-yard receiving games, didn't drop a pass during that time, and that had been like the blight in his career earlier. He's still big, he's still fast, he's still young. Like the reasons he was a first-round pick all still apply, and we finally saw him actually be a productive quarterback.
That's the first time I've even heard his name.
Well, and receivers are a position that sometimes take a lot longer to develop, especially now in the league where if you find a coach that will put you in the right position and don't force you to be everything to everyone, you can have some value.
Are you telling me that Joe Flacco wasn't the guy that would get the most value out of his receivers? That's ridiculous.
Well, he will get a lot of pass interference calls out of them. That's what Joe Flacco will do.
You got to throw it remotely in bounds. Anyone else that undercover?
Yeah. So
names?
again, for different reasons with the same idea, the bargain basement, you get the old guys, right? So if you have a problem on your offensive line, you've got Jason Peters, you've got Andrew Whitworth. These are guys that are definitely at the very tail end of their career. They're the Tom Brady of offensive line, right?
Maybe they go with Tom Brady.
Maybe.
To L.A.
To L.A., yeah, they would definitely repair the Chargers' left tackle spot for a season. Or, you know, a team like the Browns, right? If you're now in a spot where you don't know what Baker Mayfield is anymore.
True.
You thought he was the answer, and now it's like, oh crap, did we get that wrong? Is he actually a bad quarterback? Let's start eliminating variables, right? Let's replace Greg Robinson is 157 pounds a week.
He's pretty variable.
With a solid left tackle. Let's eliminate that question. Now at least we know it's all on Baker, and we can figure out what he is.
I like that. I really like the idea of going after players where you don't have to spend all your cap.
Right.
You have to draft all the players in the draft, and you should, but you don't have to spend all the money that you have in cap space. And I think that's a really shrewd way to build your team. So to kind of circle back, this isn't about saving your franchise. It's about something that we've talked a ton about, which is establishing depth.
Yeah.
Defensively at positions where you normally would have to pay a really high price to get premium play, but where average play is perfectly fine and you can win with it, such as at the tackle position. I want to get you out of here on this. Eric has propositioned me about the potential of a Kirk Cousins for Jimmy G trade.
Wow.
And I would be sick. You and Eric both would look at it from the Vikings' point of view. Would you see that as an upgrade?
So this is current contract situations, or this just players in a vacuum?
Forget the contracts for a second.
Okay, I think that last season, Kirk Cousins was a better quarterback than Jimmy G. I have zero confidence in that being true going forward.
I would be devastated. I can root for Jimmy G. I could not root for Kirk Cousins.
The issue here, and there are people, the majority of the people that interact with me on Twitter after I put this out there said unequivocally Cousins is better than Jimmy G, which I think is a little bit of recency bias.
Yes,
and that Cousins
huge
played extremely well for a month of last season and then had a good playoff game against New Orleans. But I do think like fundamentally they're about the same. And then it comes down to exactly what your biggest issue isn't with Cousins, the player, his arm strength. He's got a better arm than Jimmy G. He's probably more accurate, handles pressure about the same. It's the fact that, like, and this is something we can't quantify analytically, people just don't respect Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, neither do I.
The most Kirk Cousins thing ever, though, was that video that Chris Sims posted of him at the Super Bowl giving the special handshake to like everybody that sat down. You know, the thumbs, the fist bumps, everything, right? And then Kirk Cousins was the only guy there all week who gave him like a simple businessman's handshake. That's Kirk Cousins in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Here's the way I would put it. I think their play on balance, it's about the same. But if I'm going on the road to play a team in the playoffs, I'm not even watching the game with Kirk Cousins. Like, I'm just not. And I know they beat the Saints. I get it. I just have zero faith in him, and I think Jimmy G at least gives you a shot.
Yeah, and there are people. I think that people are right to point out the fact that some of like Jimmy G's appearance and Jimmy G's like demeanor is giving him some edge that is transcending on the field. But I don't like having. All of us have played sports before. Like that's kind of real. I mean, if you go into the huddle and you don't believe that somebody can get something done,
yes,
then it's tougher.
We've all played with those guys who are like the star on the team, but you just know that like this guy's kind of a doofus and a loser, and when it comes down to it, he's going to wilt.
Or conversely, a person who's like, you know, a player who like will, you know that no matter what, they're going to give it, they're going to transcend it. And I think that there's a little bit of like people just think Kirk's a businessman.
Well, Cousins also does that. So he has these brain farts that most other quarterbacks don't have. Not in terms of like, oh, that's a bad decision. I've thrown the ball to a linebacker. I didn't see him or I misread the coverage. It's like something happened in his head and he just spasmed and threw a backwards lateral for a fumble.
You mean like kneeling instead of spiking?
Or kneeling instead of spiking. Like when you press the wrong button in Madden. Like somebody controlling Kirk Cousins, all the switches in his brain, every now and again just short circuits. And he does the things that are like, okay, come on, you can't, like, one of those in a career is an embarrassment, right? One of these a season is, like, there's a problem.
And there's probably the something to the fact that Garoppolo is a little bit younger. He has less experience. There's probably a higher ceiling there. It is troubling that the Niners took the ball out of his hands for a decent amount of the playoffs, but they could because they were ahead. So it wasn't it wasn't overtly, hey, he sucks, so we're not going to like throw the ball that much. He had a really good 3/4 of a Super Bowl, which Cousins has never had anywhere near. So it's interesting. I think Vikings fans, ones that I've talked to, would welcome it if they traded them straight up. And your reaction to it, because I respect your opinion, is such that I'm going to be a little bit more towards the Jimmy G side, but knowing everything that, if you put things perfectly into Cousins and then you tell him not to think, he's probably better.
That sums it up. That sums it up perfectly. Samuel, thank you for joining us. We
Anytime,
appreciate
gents.
it. Makes it very fun.
Thanks for having me.
I'm not going to give you a high five or
No.
shake your hand,
Not
but
what
No, we're going to
Lysol.
hand you a Lysol wipe on the way out.
Perfect.
All righty, Sam Monson from the PFF NFL show, which you can watch in about 5 minutes. So you might want to stay, well, not on the same channel, but like you get the idea. What was the most interesting thing? So I want to go like interview at a time real quick. Most interesting thing from talking to Mike. And now we're awkwardly close to each other.
yeah,
So I'm
it's
gonna
okay.
lean back
It's
here.
okay. Yeah. I liked that he leaned in a little bit to the war stuff about running the football. I thought that was a very reasonable way to say this is why I like players on the interior of the defense. And I don't necessarily agree 100% with it, because if the league evolves, then you're stuck with this player that's not valuable. But it was a reasonable, I think, answer to a question that I thought, he was going to have a different answer to than we would.
Yeah, Mike is, Mike works super hard and watches, he uses the grading and also makes sure to add every bit of context that he can to, the grading by going back and watching all the players. And so when he talks about, a guy like Jerry Jeudy and has him as his number one guy, it really means a lot. And I think, the fact that he's so confident he can win from the outside is interesting because he certainly did it at Alabama. But there's also this, just this big athleticism difference between him and Henry Ruggs and how that translates. I thought that was very interesting. I think the most interesting thing, though, was his offensive tackle tiers, because they were more different, I think, than our opinions on wide receivers, and having Mekhi Becton that high was fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always going to be, with people who watch film, there's always going to be an attachment to seeing something, and it's not even seeing something once. It's seeing something that's repetitive but not a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've seen this guy do this thing 10 times, so can this guy do it 500 times during a season? And I think, to Mike's point, Becton has that kind of stuff. He's also 6'7", 340 or whatever. So, like, there is a lot there. And, guys like us are just going to say, okay, well, we'll make that bet if we get the opportunity to in the second round.
Yep.
We're not going to make that bet in the first round where stakes are higher. So I did think that was interesting as well. I thought Ben Barch because it's really
that was
hard to
fascinating.
model. It's really hard to model Division III. Because I'm going to tell you this right now, the competition level, you just can't simulate at that.
Joke.
So, and we have a hard time modeling it because it's a situation where it's been N equals 1, type of thing for us in terms of offensive linemen. But it was interesting that he said that he liked him. He also likes the Kyle Duggar guy as a safety from Lenore Ryan, which again, it's sort of one of those where I have to trust somebody like Mike because our numbers, we don't have enough, film, to grade all those players and all that kind of stuff, and hence model them.
From Sam, the Brashad Perryman thing was not something that I had thought about, and it reminded me of, if you're looking at, if Tom Brady and the Patriots are like, how do I replenish this receiving core? It reminded me that you may be able to look, you don't have to necessarily look at those top guys. I'm still not sure that gets it done. But that's a piece where if you are just looking to add some depth to your receiving core, that's the type of signing you're looking for if you are a fan of a team out there. You are not looking for, let's break the bank on some guy, some edge rusher, for example.
Yeah, and we look at that when stars are acquired, it's rarely ever – okay, let's circle back here. Like, Khalil Mack was acquired in the trade, but, like, the Bears franchise isn't fundamentally better than it was when they acquired him.
True.
Odell Beckham Jr. is another one. Like, again, these are trades, but, like, it does project into,
No, that's fair.
and depth is important. And this is the time of year where I think that knowledge needs to be heeded.
I would agree. Alrighty, stay healthy and safe out there as long as we are able to keep recording. It might become remote at some point, but
Yeah.
we're going to make it happen for you, try and get you guys some content out there. We will be back with you in one way, shape, or form on Monday. Thanks, guys.